Howdy folks, I'm Tom Barbalet, and today I'm going to be presenting a talk called ApeSDK, a series of vignettes. And ironically, I'm talking in the industry portion of the ERA conference because I'm not going to actually talk about any of my work in industry. I might a little bit, I'll touch on it. It depends how I feel about it. But yeah, I'm here to tell basically about my hobby, which has been developing what was originally called the Nirvana Project, then became Noble Ape, and is now known as the ApeSDK. So it's had various name changes. We'll get onto one of them actually in this talk. But I wanted to just have the opportunity to say thank you to the people in ERA for giving me the opportunity to talk. It's something that I haven't had recently. I haven't had for a few years now. There'll be slides according to this. Oh, speaking of slides, if you want slides to this particular talk, go to ApeSDK, apesdk.com/doc, singular, DOC, / and you will be able to access the slides and all the documents that I talk about in this particular recording. I'd like to give a special shout out to Peter Wallace and Dr. Amy Khan and Anne and Dr. Adams and a bunch of people Fernando, a bunch of people who've made my stay, for want of a better term, in the ERA Discord channel a really pleasant experience. So thank you all for keeping up with me in some regard and just ignoring other things that I say in another regard. One of the things that I've hoped for the ERA Discord channel, I did mention it in my recent video cast, was we need an extremely old researchers in artificial life section on the ERA Discord channel, just as a means of me posting periodically associated with my very mature projects, and very mature, that's probably the wrong thing to say, but let's just say my very mature projects, and just have the ability to communicate somewhere about all the stuff that's going on. Although I do have a video cast. We'll talk about that in a minute too. Oh, one final thing. There's an Easter egg at the end of this talk, and if you have access to apesdk.com/doc, you might have already found the Easter egg, but if you haven't, there's a secret bit of the slides at the end. If you download the slides, you can go to the end. Let's just assume we're watching this on YouTube. Anyway, so there's an Easter egg at the end. I think I said that. So please like and subscribe. This is going out on the last monkey standing, which has been I started it through COVID in order to capture various experiments that I was doing with the ApeSDK. And it's just, a series of videos, my collecting interests, some curious stuff with regards to music boxes and dice, and now a series of talks with a wide variety of folk. I'm really privileged to have the opportunity of chatting with these people, who many of them are my friends already. So it's a wonderful chance to have the opportunity to chat with people and talk about artificial life specifically. So the other thing is the biotacast.org. That's a good resource for audio. I've had audio for the past 18 years in there. Interviewed a wide variety of people. Dr. Ken Stanley, who's going after me, maybe he's a professor. Anyway, Ken Stanley, who's going after me, I think, in this talk, is one of the alumni of the Biota podcast. So biotacast.org. And just, download the audio. Subscribe to the podcast feed. You'll find the last couple of bits of audio are all when I'm moving to videocast, but that's just the nature of that. Oh, stay tuned for an Easter egg at the end. It's not to do with Joe Rogan. He appears on 2 of the slides. So, how do I give an introduction associated with the past 28 years? June 13th, 1996 was when I started my simulation project. And it really was the idea of, it was open source before open source was open source. Ironically, I'm on the gitlab.com/apesdk is open source. I've been recognized after many years. So I actually get a free GitLab account associated with my development. So let's not say the word open source again. Oh, so if you look at IEEE graphics and applications in the docs, doc directory, for a better term, you'll see that I've actually created my own graphics as part of the ApeSDK. And I've done so, I don't know how many years ago, 20 years ago now, I think was when that article was written. So it's been the kind of a unique perspective with regards to graphics. I've got to send a shout out to Nuno Vincent Barreto, who has just been an amazing person to work with, because he's currently taking the ApeSDK and moving it to the Unreal Engine, which finally, this has been something that I've been tantalizingly close to. I mean, it's basically Polyworld, but with very modern graphics and obviously my simulation running underneath. Peter Wallace as well, I've got to give a shout out to him because he actually got the simulation up and running and built the Windows version on the front of ApeSDK.com. So if you go to ApeSDK, there's a Windows version and a couple of Mac versions, and also a video of me explaining how to get the Mac versions to do command line and regular running from the environment. So I guess really what I want to say here is that if you're interested in the source code, go to gitlab.com/ApeSDK, APESDK, and start getting into the source code. Get in contact with me as well, barbale@gmail.com, my last name BARBALET @gmail.com, if you'd like to, talk about anything that I raised in this talk, or in particular if you're interested in the source code. So, yeah, getting into the source, we will do so in a few minutes, but I just want to give that plug initially. Oh, also, obviously, if you are viewing this on YouTube, please like and subscribe to Last Monkey Standing, because basically you'll get videos and conversations on a bunch of different bits and pieces coming up in the foreseeable future, and hopefully I won't get tired of it. I don't think I will. It's a pretty exciting format. So I think of myself as a hobbyist fundamentally, and there's a large kind of treatise of hobbyists contributing to biology. Darwin has this notion of the pigeon fancier, and the pigeon fancier at the time was a pigeon hobbyist, and they continue to this day, actually. I have a friend whose father's still a pigeon fancier hobbyist. And it's really interesting because when you look at yourself as a pigeon fancier, you can basically do a whole series of really fun things. You don't have to do something in a prescriptive or, anything like that. You just can create these simulations and have fun with them, which is ultimately, what you need to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about Hiroki's experience because I find it absolutely fascinating. But once you develop these simulations, just enjoy them. I've obviously spent 28 years with my simulation, so maybe I'm, not perhaps the stereotype with regards to artificial life developers, but I think the maturity, in Hiroki's case, from 2011 to 2018, he looked at his evolution, ESC, evolution swarm chemistry, and, what he got out of that was actually discovering a wide variety of different bits and pieces that he hadn't found when he originally published associated with his simulation. And I think that's a beautiful metaphor. That's certainly something that resonates with me very highly, that I've been able to just play with my simulation after hours and make changes, and source code's always being edited, it's always being moved in different directions. So what I think of associated with my particular perspective with regards to science is that I'm pre-Dawkinsian, and I've said that in previous Last Monkey Standing videos. Obviously, I reference Dawkins. I think Dawkins is extremely important to reference, but as I was saying with my friend Jeffrey Ventrella, I think Daniel Dennett is probably a better Dawkins than Dawkins. And as Gerald de Jong mentioned I think he posted on a video, he thinks that Stephen Jay Gould is really more associated with my thinking with regards to the fact that there's no meaningful science versus religion debate. We can move that aside. That's a political thing. So when I think about artificial life and when I think about the importance of artificial life, it has been captured at various points by various people. I think of Stephen Levy's book. I think of Professor Adami. I think of Hiroki. I think of Dr. Tim Taylor. But most importantly, I think of Margaret A. Bowden. Basically, Margaret A. Bowden produced the philosophy of artificial life in 1996, literally the same year my project was started. And really, it wouldn't have been started if it weren't for Margaret A. Bowden's work. I think the philosophy of artificial life is just such an important surveying, and just something which you can come back to frequently and just reminds you of the level of enchantment. There was a historical level of enchantment. One of the things that I say to Dr. Taylor periodically is we need another Levy book just to give a sense of where this thing is and where it's headed. But having given those references, I'm really thankful from Stephen Levy's book to have known Larry Yeager and have corresponded with Larry Yeager. Larry Yeager is now retired, and I hope really strongly that even as an artificial life hobbyist, that I will be able to retire and just look at the sky as Larry Yeager does. I think it's wonderful, the notion of retirement in this day and age. Certainly not associated with politicians in this part of the world, but let's move that aside. So, a friendship with Larry Yeager, a friendship with Hiroki, a friendship with Dr. Tim Taylor, and we'll get to Margaret A. Bowden, but I should have pointed out, actually, Hiroki and Dr. Tim Taylor, both of them have large treatises on artificial life. Well, in the case of Dr. Tim Taylor, it's open-ended evolution, but still, looking at the subject in such a strong way. And I think certainly I'm really glad to have these people as friends. And Hiroki's going to be on the podcast with Dr. Tim Taylor, a videocast, actually talking about his evolutionary swarm chemistry. And is it an example of open-ended evolution? I will leave that for an upcoming video. So let's talk about biota. Let's talk about the reason that I've recorded people for the past 18 years and, what is this thing called biota, particularly in contrast to the artificial life conferences. Well, biota was an alternative conference series that was developed by Dr. Bruce Damer. Dr. Bruce has basically shepherded the biota community for a number of years. He now does things that are completely different. So if you go to biota.org, you'll see the stuff that he's working on currently, I think associated with the origins of life. My perspective is, as a parent, the origins of life is interesting, but it's, you've got to take the life to school, you've got to take the life, to the swimming pool on occasion, you've got to feed the life, and, you've got to do all these things. So the origin of life as a parent seems less, interesting as a topic. The other thing that Bruce has done is associated with the centreofminds.org, which is psychedelics and science, putting the two of those things together. I personally have a feeling I've engaged at various points, sometimes even with Dr. Bruce, with the psychedelic community. Certainly my perspective is that the psychedelic community needs to probably reach back and bring in minorities and other folks who've been terribly impacted by the war on drugs fundamentally. And the notion that this is just a upper middle class group of men predominantly who get to pontificate associated with their various views and things like that, it still rubs me slightly the wrong way. The really exciting thing that Bruce did do is he got on Joe Rogan. And when Bruce was on Joe Rogan, it's 561. So back in the Spotify days, we'll never actually probably see Bruce on Joe Rogan in YouTube form. It was on YouTube for a period of time. I watched it live when it first came out. And the thing that captivated me was that this was the most important interface with regards to everyday people who were just looking at the field of artificial life. And I think really strongly that we need to have the aim as artificial life developers to just put ourselves out there as much as possible. This is really the takeaway from Bruce appearing on Joe Rogan. It was the sense that finally one of our own is in a position to actually talk to, millions of people, quite literally. And I have serious qualms associated with, Bruce's appearance on Joe Rogan. I'm really disappointed that he didn't get a second appearance for a start. I mean, he had a bunch of his friends who were doing bits and pieces, which is how he got into actually talking on Joe Rogan. But I think that still remains, an untouchable point. Maybe the Easter egg that I give will be another untouchable point, but certainly from my perspective, having Bruce on Joe Rogan was just like, finally, we can become mainstream with our artificial life developers. Finally, this is happening. Anyway, I shouldn't need to talk too much about that. The things that I really have gotten out of the Biota audio, the podcast, biotacast.org, is associated with a friendship with a bunch of really interesting people. Jeffrey Ranchella, Gerald DeYoung, Steve Grant, the legendary Steve Grant. Steve Grant, who did Creatures, who had the second Biota conference, who basically is the reason that Nuno Barreto got a PhD. I mean, there's a bunch of different reasons that Steve Grant is particularly interesting, and he lives the life of a recluse currently. I ping him occasionally. I hope when he watches this video, he'll definitely book himself for a Last Monkey Standing video. I should point out, Last Monkey Standing is a piece of music that I wrote. We'll talk a bit more about the music in a sec. But youtube.com/lastmonkey/@lastmonkey standing is the way to get to the videocast. But you're probably already watching it currently. So anyway. One of the more curious things that happened to me was within the last decade, and that was that I got basically expunged from the internet. It's a very curious situation. It relates to a alleged comedian. It relates to the term that I'd used to describe my simulations for many years, 20 years, and I thought it was a situation that I wouldn't have to do again. Every time I've had to do a name change, it's been like a gut punch, for want of a better term, that I've had to come out and change the names of my, source code and describe the information differently. I've got a bunch of academic papers that I've written with the name Noble Ape. But what was interesting about this experience was the first piece of correspondence that I sent to the alleged comedian, the alleged comedian's lawyers, a bunch of different people I sent it to initially, just stating there's a thing in US intellectual property rights law which says that if you do something in industry, you basically get a trademark on it. If something is done in industry, maybe commerce as well, it's equivalent to having a trademark in terms of the level of protection. But it requires you to have lawyers. And that was really the downside of what I did in this circumstance. I asserted that I had been using Noble Ape for 20 years. I asserted how I'd been using it. And that still requires legal protection. It still requires you to have lawyers to enforce that. So basically, there were a series of things that happened that were particularly disturbing through that period of time. I had developed quite a following, obviously, doing the Biotacast, doing a bunch of different podcasts, and a number of the people who listened into the podcast, and occasionally were guests on the Biotacast in particular, had created a series of Wikipedia pages about stuff that I'd done. Bruce Damer, Biota, all these kind of things were on Wikipedia. So I first sent the letter. Well, by the way, you can get that to ApeSDK.com/doc, and you'll see in the special associated with the ALAV conferences, or the ALAV conference, specifically the letter that I sent to a group of people who were all purporting to be using this name Noble Ape, which I found very curious at the time. I think I actually probably scared them through that interaction, and certainly they came back incredibly forcefully, and it did a bunch of, really disturbing and curious things. I had to work with the company I was working for's legal department at the time. There were a bunch of additional things, that were created by my instigation, and obviously the alleged comedians, alleged lawyers would say that, I was provocative or provoked them with regards to just saying that I'd had this intellectual property for 20 years. And obviously that narrative gets kind of old because they actually explicitly expunged me from Wikipedia. And how do they do that? They paid Wikipedia editors. I have a friend in Germany, or had a friend in Germany, who explained to me exactly what happened with regards to, you can actually pay for the expungement of people on Wikipedia because there's just no checks and balances. The system is based on, you have a group of 5 people who have to try and find the information about yourself. Well, he had paid for Google searches, or his alleged lawyers had paid for Google searches to avoid any of my content. I mean, ironically, you would search for the name of my project at the time, and you get a child's hand-painted drawing. That was the joke, right? You couldn't get to my stuff, but let's put the child's hand-painted drawing up as that. What I did through this period of time was twofold. Firstly, I took the conversation from the 2012, just after the 2012 Artificial Life Conference. I met with a series of academics at Michigan State University and actually created it as a play on NobleApe.com. These are real people. Some of them are actually quite interesting scientists, and I just didn't have any contact with them after doing that initial introduction. None of them said, let's keep in contact or this kind of stuff. So I feel putting it online as a play on NobleApe.com is just a kind of catharsis for me, associated with, well, I'm putting out the fact that you won't find NobleApe.com through any Google search. Aside from that, here it is. Here's, the last big intellectual hurrah that I did with regards to my project Noble Ape. Anyway, other things. This alleged comedian appeared on Joe Rogan continuously through this period of time. I think probably net maybe 6 appearances. And just the whole thing was so curious to me that he was the pinnacle of associated with, what I believed at the time, appearing on Joe Rogan. He was this individual who was actually causing me distress and damage fundamentally, and that's what they were doing. Now, one thing that was positive that did come out of this was I had a wide variety of music. I basically made music as part of the development. It was central. I should probably have a CD or two to kind of wave in front of the camera, because basically I would make CD-ROMs, and you could thankfully put software and music together, and that's what I did. So the music part of the development, the simulation music, some of it there was a wide variety of different musical styles. I mean, a lot of the stuff most recently, which is ironically in the the compilation called Last Monkey Standing 2020. That is all basically keyboard music that I played just to put different styles together, some jazz, some ragtime, all kinds of interesting stuff. You go to the earlier music, you're dealing really with, I don't even know what it'd be called now, experimental hip-hop, trip-hop, I don't know. All these terms associated with musical genres kind of go through. Anyway, I put this music online, which means that if you have a streaming service of choice, you just put my name, Tom Barbalet, Barbalet, in there, and you will get the music. That was one positive thing that did come out of this whole experience. So one of the fascinating things about my simulation work is I've tried to put competing theories of the mind together. Like, it was always curious to me when I was at university that you would give these, you'd get these competing theories of the mind when I was doing a philosophy degree, and I didn't necessarily think they always had to be in competition. In fact, it struck me quite strange that people would just assume that these things were in competition, sometimes by definition, sometimes otherwise. But yeah, with my simulation, I've taken as many different, models of the mind and put it all together. What was fascinating through this is that it kind of creates open-ended soap operas. That's the way I like to think of it. You have all this drama, all this interaction. Obviously, you have children. It's all sex and violence, basically. So you have all this stuff going on. Very kind of British soap opera-esque, more EastEnders than, Days of Our Lives. But it's really very curious how what comes out of this is narrative. And that's really, one point about this. Apple and Intel used my simulation from 2003 till about 2011. And really, this is the most focused time that has been used on it. And I've written about that on the documentation site. So if you go, Nature-Inspired Informatics is a good one. If you look at the Apple documentation, you get to see basically what my simulation was used for at Apple specifically, and also at Intel. So I don't need to say any more about that. You're going to check out the documents accordingly. My friend Bob Mottram is an industrial roboticist based in the UK, based in Yorkshire actually, and he has been a driving force with regards to two parts of my development, with regards to a certain part of the ApeSDK, and also with regards to the London 1940, which is my second talk that I'm going to be presenting at the Zero conference. So Bob Mottram's stuff you can find in the Origin of Mind from 2013. That was a talk that I actually gave at the company I was working for at the time. You can use my LinkedIn to work out what company I was working for in 2013. And it was really the last time that I had kind of public intellectual discourse associated with my development. I mean, really, I've been embargoed pretty well since then and really haven't put anything out. I mean, one of the things that, has changed, and you can see in my, LinkedIn exactly what has changed in recent years, is that I now have freedom. I now have creative freedom to come and talk about an alleged comedian and have to do all this. None of this is needs to be censored anymore. So it's just like freedom, basically. I wanted to point out that in the ApeSDK, there are various homages to various technologies. Obviously, Bob Mottram was taking the work of Cynthia Brazil with regards to sex, hunger, social, what's the third one? Sex, hunger, social, and fatigue. So the four things are scalar definitions of Cynthia Brazil's robotics. He just did amazing stuff. And the narrative engine, which was one of his best examples, again, look at the Origin of Mind for more discussion associated with the narrative engine, he uses Core War. So there's a whole lot of throwbacks to the Cellular Automata, to Core War, to all these bits and pieces, to Tom Ray's Tierra. There's all these different throwbacks to, basically what I was joking with Kyle Harrington about, a top 5 of artificial life papers of all time. So that, I think, Core War, Tierra, this kind of stuff, my simulation is an homage to that as much as anything. I now come to the section of the talk where I talk about the social network that I am the CTO of. Shout-outs to Ken Stanley. It appears that people in this field just get into social networking sites at some stage. So Meadster is really the brainchild of a gentleman called Josh Matthew. And Joshua is just a polymath. When you meet him, you don't he has wisdom beyond his years. Like, he really is a fascinating person to meet and talk with. He actually came and we had breakfast in Las Vegas a few weeks ago. And I think for him, it was an opportunity to see, yes, I was real. And for me, it was an opportunity for me to see, yes, he is real. And really, he's just created this amazing wealth. He basically spent a year studying what was defective in social network sites. There's plenty there. Obviously, COVID explains some of that as well. But he's just a brilliant mind. We have a CSO who's also very brilliant, Dr. Stan. We've got a wide variety of really smart developers. Shout outs to Daniel, Julio, and Samuel. And obviously, Era's own Peter Wallace is a founding engineer at Meetster. So if there was any question about what was the social networking site of this particular era, sorry, Dr. Stanley, but I think Meetster has it. We're aiming to get it out in August as well. And the sideline, unfortunately, it is only for US EDU students currently. The aim of Meetster is to create a rich environment. I mean, this is literally Facebook's breakfast, as British folks might say. This is what Facebook started doing before they became Facebook. But no one wants to do it right currently. So there's a bunch of ML, a bunch of agent modeling, just a lot of really good stuff that's coming through the people that are part of Meetster. And we've got developers who are just really, just amazing people. I mean, Samuel has been the CTO, but it's ironically a startup in Copenhagen. So you're hearing me in Copenhagen. He was the CTO of a startup in Copenhagen. But more interestingly, a majority of the founders of Meetster are actually migrants. And there's a key distinction here between immigrants and migrants. Migrants means that you actually want to leave the place you're in, whereas immigrants, you want to stay in the place you're in after moving from somewhere else. And I think the notion of what migration is, or being migrant is genuinely lost on most of the population, because certainly in this country, there's just a view that if people end up here, this is the place that they want to end up. Anyway, I could talk a lot about that. Let's talk about Dr. Stan. So Dr. Stan is an academic at NYU. He also has a bunch of other academic interests, and he's really just a fascinating fellow. He is obviously leading the ML effort with Daniel, and it's just amazing to work with people who are so passionate and so intelligent and so focused on this thing. So that's why I'm a very strong supporter of Meetster, and certainly it's fundamentally created by Joshua Matthew. We're now coming to the section of the talk which I call on my notes, if you have my slides, interesting people. And the first interesting person I wanted to do a shout out to, and she is not someone who I've ever had any degree of communication with, but she's someone who's absolutely critical to my development, is Margaret A. Bowden. And about 2015, 2016, I was on the International Society of Artificial Life board, and the one thing I did was I submitted Margaret A. Bowden for a Lifetime Achievement Award through ISIL. And she got it. I mean, what was ironic was all these people on the board were like, yeah, we've never given her an award. Yeah, Margaret A. Bowden, we should give her an award. So it was one of those funny things where I just threw it out there as someone who was critical in my life and very important with regards to the simulation development. And thankfully, she got the Lifetime Achievement Award. So that, for me, was a real, it was good. It was a piece of good that I could do on the International Society of Artificial Life board. And yeah, it was just amazing to hear about the conference she got the award, all these kind of things. When I was a boy growing up in Australia, I had two childhood heroes. One of them was a fellow called John Draper, or Captain Crunch, and the other was Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak. And basically my whole life, up until probably when I got married, fundamentally, I was obsessed with these two people. They were incredibly important with regards to my formative years in Australia, with regards to programming, with regards to, just working on this thing, this simulation thing, which is now known as the ApeSDK. And so I had to meet both of them. And John Draper Crunch I met when I was 18. And I thought I had the book around here. I actually... Let me see if I... Yep, I do. Excuse me. This is the secret of the little beyond the little blue box. I also missed something in my expungement on Wikipedia. I outlined a bunch of things that were expunged. This is a book I wrote when I was, in 1993. You can do the math associated with that. Field of Chaos had a small but loyal group of readers and people, and when the Wikipedia page for that was removed, it was just like completely guilt by association. It just made me feel, anyway, the whole thing was just sickening. So this is John Draper's biography. It's called Beyond the Little Blue Box, and I am listed inside. Here we go. You probably can't see that here. So I'm an editor of this book. John Draper is a remarkably curious character in the history of technology, and I think this is what fascinates me about this book. Was I wrote about him, and actually Steve Wozniak writes in it as well. And my experience was very curious with regards to John Draper. It still is. The guy's still alive. He still lives in Las Vegas. This is a book which has a long and strange history, which I can't really talk about too much in this particular recording. But anyway, certainly the reprint of Field of Chaos that I'm doing currently, Craig, he goes by Craig Wilson-Fraser in this one. Where is he? He's here. So this is my esteemed, I don't know what you'd call him, co-defendant, let's just say. He's got a version of Field of Chaos which will be coming out very shortly, thanks to him. If you look at ApeSDK.com/doc, there is a visa letter that Steve Wozniak wrote for me from 2001. And I think it's probably, unquestionably, the most curious piece of artificial life history that I think exists anywhere. I mean, if you Google Steve Wozniak currently, I think it's 140 million. He probably had a lot more money when I knew him. But yeah, I was able to spend 18 months with Steve Wozniak, and the letter kind of represents some of our interaction, not all of our interaction. I used to go breakfast with him quite a bit. But yeah, I think that's the most curious piece of, artificial life history that exists. And I wanted to put it up on ApeSDK.com/doc, so you could have an opportunity to see where I was in 2001. So I am known, aside from the artificial life simulation, which I'm not really known for, I'm known as the I don't know what one would call it, the podcaster for model rail enthusiasts. And I think very much associated with developing artificial life is very much the same as the model railroading hobby. You're creating a beautiful bauble, you're making it exact, you're looking at it in a bunch of different ways. Obviously, this was Professor Adami's feedback as well, that, what you have with an artificial life development is not something that you can explain to people. I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to talk with you guys because obviously you might understand what actually creating an artificial life simulation is like. But it's only been incredibly important for me. ApeSDK.com, there's a Discord server. Please get on that if you want to talk with me more. London1940.org. If you get the show notes, if you get the slides from this talk, you'll be able to have a look at my LinkedIn. Please message me up front saying you're interested in talking with me because of this talk specifically. That's a very good way of actually getting me to communicate with you on LinkedIn. Although you could also use my last name at gmail.com and just let me know that you saw this talk, found it very interesting, would like more information with regards to the simulation, all of the above. I've probably gone terribly over time, but it's been a real pleasure to be able to talk with you today, and thank you very much for watching this video. John Bartley in Las Vegas, Nevada, signing out.